where I was and my own position that I was able to think about action beyond my own home. My home was still standing. My roof was still on. I had food stored. I could move out of my house. There were a few of us who were in the same position. So a lot of us gathered in local community spaces, but wait, community. Remember, we're reflecting about communities. Who is this community that I'm talking about? This community specifically is people from all over the western area of Puerto Rico who knew each other from different ways. We congregated in these community spaces, meaning we congregated in spaces that some of us had access to or ownership of. In the case of, well, your side, I don't know, but on this side, we have the big community space, the big community meeting of people showing up and being like, listen, I don't know what to do. And how did we communicate? It's person to person, networks, directly, who are we? But when we entered this space, I want to make it super clear because a lot of the people there made it super clear. We arrived, maybe because we had met through the university, but we were not representing the university. We showed up having met through official channels, but everyone was representing their own self. And that was very important to the people in that room, because the university did not provide the support that we needed. So we came up with it on our own. And it turns out a lot of people wanted to help, and that was fantastic. People from outside of Puerto Rico, from outside of Mayagüez, so many supplies fell in our laps, literally. What do you have to do when you have so many things and you don't know where to take them? Oh, and there's another thing. A lot of people with a lot of need were also falling into our laps. So it's coordinating all these efforts at the same time that you're trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. Well, you start asking people, hey, listen, do you have a space where we can store all this stuff? Hey, listen, do you have, I don't know, gas in your car? Because gas is being rationed too. So it's pulling together all the resources of all the people possible. Some people coming from outside, on the ground, seeing what's going on, communicating back to their base, with satellite phones, with whatever it was that we could have pulled up. And then moving into communities and going into the spaces of those that ended up seeking us and us seeking them. It was about communication. And there was so much going on, we couldn't possibly handle it all. These pictures are of La Brigada Solidaria del Oeste, the Solidarity Brigade of the West. It was completely ad hoc. It came up organically. We had to, because that is the situation that we were in. Universities are communities, connected to other communities. And even within universities, there's many, many groupings that end up being communities. So all of these communities in communication and working with each other is really what makes the kinds of networks that we need to be able to move forward. Human networks, more than anything else, are what matters, especially when infrastructure is down. But we know that from our own work. Why are we here? Why do we come to conferences? We know that human networks are what make a difference. Universities must take care of their own communities, and it was super clear to me, and it was super clear to a lot of people on the ground. Our university was not taking care of us as a community. I don't know what necessarily was going on in each of the lives of the people that were in charge of the university, because that's also a really big important part of it, is that we are all humans and we were all taking care of ourselves, but also, how do we prepare them so that we can take care of our community as well as take care of ourselves? I was told to dream, and since I get to dream on this panel on this day, I'd like to dream about a clear response with previously set expectations for dealing with catastrophes, so that we know what's going to happen after they hit and how we're going to bounce back. I would also like to dream about intentional connections that are mutually beneficial between communities, within the university and outside of it, especially with those communities that end up nurturing ours. The shopkeepers that feed us, the people that we walk into the coffee shops and they know our name and know our order, the banks that we go to, the doctors that treat us, people who nurture our communities. We need to think about nurturing each other. And I think something that's really important is trust, because the reason that we were able to work together is because we knew each other, or we knew of each other, someone referred you to someone else, And I'm going to trust that you're going to do what you said you're going to do because I saw you working in another space. Because I know you work with this or that group. And trust is an extremely important element. And that is what's going to lead me to hope, and what I hope leads us all to hope. So very pointedly, very specifically, how can our community, university community, take care of us? Infrastructure. We need to talk about funding. We need to talk about how our infrastructure has to be ready to face these things. And we need to talk about the $512 million budget cut. We need to talk about how that is going to affect how prepared we're going to be able to be at the University of Puerto Rico. We also need to talk about groups that were specifically vulnerable. Graduate students who depend on the stipends that they received, especially international students. The government of Colombia ended up sending a plane to pick up its graduate students and take them out of the island because they were in a panic about what was going on in the ground in Mayagüez. That should not be happening. We need to be able to take care of these students and not just leave them in the limbo. Community Oasis is an idea that I wish had been more available to more people, because the Graduate Research and Innovation Center at the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez is one of the main reasons why I was able to write at all during that time. They had connection to the internet and they had electricity faster than we did at my house. So I was actually able to get work done. Without that, where would I be? But then what about the people who need electricity to charge their phones, to be able to give themselves respiratory therapy? A lot of other things that are really, really important and that the university did not have open doors to. Mental health. I cannot stress this enough. Not just for students, staff, faculty. There weren't even enough people to go around for students. And this is embedded into the institutional capacity. So what about everybody else? Equal opportunity, I think, is super important. While there were some really great initiatives about universities reaching out to specific professors or to specific research teams, there was a concerted effort to make sure that everybody heard about these opportunities. So if you were lucky enough to know someone who knew someone, you got to go in. But if you didn't, what about you? And responsible research. I think that is something I cannot stress enough. And it's recognizing expertise, knowledge that's on the ground, both within the university and outside of it. Recognizing and valuing existing community structures and ways of being, ways of existing. Understanding positionality and the implicit bias that goes with it when we approach and when we speak to each other. Implicit bias is something I haven't heard enough mentioned and reiterated. Who we are, what we grow up with, affects the way that we see other people. It affects the way that we are able to do our work. We need to think about ourselves as we move in our spaces. Who are we? What are we coming in with? What are we bringing to the space? And how are we relating to other people? Politics play into this. Contextual dynamic also plays into it. And if you don't know about it, it's important to connect to those who do. So collaboration, that's what this platform is all about, right? And just to bring in a little bit of what I've been looking into, what I mean by systems thinking, I want to show you something from, it's a diagram from a report called The Water of Systems Change. And it's thinking about what it means to make a change that's real, that's transcendental, that's sustainable, a word we love. So it's going from structural change, those explicit things that we can see and we can touch, those policies, practices, and resource flows that we can visualize, the money that we can touch, the water that we bring in. And then realizing that below that or behind that, there's also relationships. There's connections. There's power dynamics that are at play. And those need to be moved and changed as well. But even below that, to get to the inside, to get to what's going on really deep within, and to make something that's going to move forward, no matter what space you're in, we have to talk about mental models. That's where you're going to get your transformative change. How are we thinking about this work? How are we feeling about this work? All of us that are here, and all of the places where we work or want to work with. So I'm going to leave you with that, and thank you so much.
speaking of mental models, I think that's a beautiful segue to what I was planning to ask you to do at this moment, which was to close your eyes and think about when we talk about disaster response, who are the people that come to mind? What are the images that come into your mind when I say disaster response? And then if I could ask for anyone who feels like sharing that, their reaction, yes.
I would say family.
Family,
Highly vulnerable communities and highly impoverished families.
Okay. Yes.
I live next to the Northern California fires. And one of the things I was really impressed with as I drove around the area is, in a sense, how small the actual disaster area was as compared with the resource basin you could draw from. And we didn't know how to do that.
Who are some other people or actors that you think of maybe in that resource base that you maybe wish you could have accessed, or people who come to help? Who are they? Neighbors? Government?
University administrators.
So it's only because we are in a university that you said that. So I'm glad that you said it. And I think that one of the things that's so wonderful about this particular conference is that it is forcing us to really embrace the role that universities should have in disasters. And when I talk about disasters, or in my talk today, I'm really trying to think about the whole continuum from preparedness, mitigation, recovery, and response. It's no surprise that some of the first actors that came to people's minds, or that at least were expressed here, were family, community members, neighbors. Who is there to help you, and who do you rely on in your community? Others are government, and that might be firefighters. It might be emergency responders with other names and other titles. And all of those people represent their own institutions. And it is really more the case than not that the institution of higher education is not on that list of responders. And the fact that higher education is not typically on the list suggests things that we have heard a lot about at this conference, and that those of you attending know very well, is that institutions, the higher education institution, has really successfully isolated itself from the disaster response ecosystem. So, I am trained as an academic, so you have to forgive me when I talk about an institution as an it. So we've got this institution of higher education, when the reality is it's a multifaceted organism comprised of all types of colleagues, all types of colleges and universities that are in turn populated by an amazingly diverse population of people. And clearly, the people who are representing their institutions and colleges on this platform don't fall into these sort of traditional units in higher education. But in general, higher education really has gotten a bad rap in these last few years, and there are a lot of reasons for that. These outdated labels like Ivory Tower and the Academy, they still have a lot of resonance for how people who aren't in the university setting think about the university. So there's a lot of work to be done to both dispel that myth and to then to actually act in a way that's consistent with a model of a university, a college, as a member of its community. So it's such an honor for me to be able to be at this conference and to be hosting you all here at the University at Albany. Welcome, and thank you for being here. And to advance this discussion about really what does it mean to visualize a new role for this institution, meaning higher education. in disaster management systems. So I'm going to give a couple of examples, not from my own work, but from the larger domain of the area that I'm most familiar with, which is social work. And before I do that, I do have to confess that I've been thinking a lot about the deficiencies of higher education. But I need to counter that with the fact that I love higher education. It is the most wonderful, in my mind, institution that exists. In my own personal experience, I grew up in a college town in a family that with people who never went to college, but I was exposed to people whose parents were university professors, and then have had this wonderful life where I've spent most of my professional life in universities and colleges. And I've now found my way to be the dean of the School of Social Work, the dean of the School of Social Welfare here. And how many of you have a social work background of any sort? Thank you. So if you'll forgive me for explaining a little bit to the rest of the audience what the social work profession is all about, because I think that will really help contextualize some of the examples that I'm going to give, which again come from other schools of social work and what they have done in response to disasters. So the first thing is to understand that the curriculum of all schools of social work is directly aligned to the mission of the social work profession. So as a mission-driven profession, we inculcate our students and our faculty with the mission statement. And the mission, the primary mission of the social work profession is to enhance human well-being and help meet the basic human needs of all people, with particular attention to the needs and empowerment of people who are vulnerable, oppressed, and living in poverty. So that mission and then the values that are undergirding that mission are things like service, social justice, dignity, and worth of the person. So they obligate social workers to participate in disaster response and recovery. And they also obligate our schools to educate students to become competent practitioners of interventions that correspond to that continuum of disaster preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. So many of the examples I'm assuming that you all shared had to do with students who I'm assuming were undergraduate students in many cases, and so the undergraduates. So in that form, a lot of it is kind of service learning and volunteer opportunities that may or may not be credit bearing. So because of the nature of social work education, the examples that I'm going to be talking about are really integrated with, in these cases, master's level education. So it changes the dynamics a little bit of what's available for the university side to do and what is already kind of in place to help students and the university launch from to be more effective community members in response. So the first example is from an article called Blueprint for Creating Social Work-Centered Disaster Relief. And I have to say that it's from an article in a peer-reviewed journal because we're in an Institute of Higher Education. It's important to acknowledge that there are publications that are associated with this work. I say that a little facetiously, but that's the reality of our world. So, but the nuggets of information and knowledge that are in there are really the kinds of things that are would be so helpful and important broadly. In this particular case, there was it was the School of Social Work in Georgia that what had a long-standing relationship with a community agency called Community Connection. And it's not atypical for a School of Social Work to have long-standing relationships with community agencies because all of our students have to complete coursework, they have to complete hours of training in those agencies. And so in this particular case in Georgia, this organization approached the school and said, our community has just become home to approximately 100 families that have been evacuees of Hurricane Katrina. And the agency didn't know what to do for the families. It wasn't equipped. So the agency approached the school and said, help us, what can you do with us? So there were a couple of things that had to be in place for the school to be able to respond. That included having leadership that said, okay, what can we do? Having faculty who were willing to, in the middle of a semester, change their assignments so that students in courses could actually be given what were termed service learning opportunities that involved things like participating in assessment activities, engagement with the families. So there was one class that we call macro social work practice. Macro practice is focused on kind of identifying how community and organizations run, how can they run more effectively. So it seemed appropriate for students in that class to be asked to volunteer. They then were given the option of participating on with the community organization that had said, here are these families, they need assessment. So the students were trained on the assessment protocol, which they had had some training on assessment in general, but not for this particular family population. And then they were able to help the organization kind of identify who could be handed off to other organizations for different kinds of resources, whether it was mental health counseling or more instrumental things like food and housing. So that assessment piece was handled in one course, and then there were students in another course who were given the opportunity to actually adopt, and this is the term they used in the article, adopt one of the families for the spring semester. And the students were either in a cultural diversity class or a health and social work practice class. So they could either do their traditional assignments or they could adopt a family as their assignment. So those students who volunteered had to commit to contacting that family every week to see how they were doing, providing any assistance that they could, and because it was for academic credit, to write a reflection paper. And the families that had been identified were families that, again, were not in need of more intensive supports and services that would not have been appropriate for those kinds of engagement activities for the students in the class. And then because it's a semester-long course, the families had to be prepared for resolution or termination. And so it was an opportunity for the students to learn a very important piece of social work practice, which is how do you terminate a case with a client when it's time for them to move on, or and then I got my 2-minute warning, so forgive me. That's okay. So in that case, the example there is, I think, a really good example of an institution of higher education doing what it does normally and pivoting and reacting and responding in a way that is resonant with the need of that community, that came to them and said, we want to take advantage of the longstanding community partnership that we've had and do something in response. I don't have time to go into detail about the other example, except to say that it was much more in a crisis mode. So it occurred in New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy hit, and the School of Social Work there, if you recall what I said about social work education, students are receiving education in agencies around the state. Those agencies were hit. and couldn't function, many of them closed on a temporary basis. And then, so there was a lot that had to be done to take stock of the reality that it wasn't possible to continue social work education as usual. And so there was a whole group of students who were recruited and trained especially to be effective in agencies that were doing that immediate recovery response activity. So that also required a lot of mid-semester curricular changes that most education programs are not inclined to do. And so I think there are some important lessons there that maybe I'd like to leave you with. And that is a couple of things that I think have been raised by others as well, which is the ability to prepare and respond for a disaster is only going to be as effective as any effective pre-existing collaborations with community agencies that already exist. So being able to, for college or university to be actively nurturing its relationships with the organizations in its orbit is absolutely essential, not only to education, but essential to any kind of disaster management plan that we should be having in place. We have to have an understanding of what are the strengths that we bring to the situation, so that we can do the things that help and not expect that we're going to do the things that we're not well equipped to do. So for students in the School of Social Work, they are positioned to jump in to help. But many of them, if they themselves are affected by the disaster, aren't really the people to do it. So we need to, in any response situation, be able to manage the expectations and the realities in that way. And then I guess the other sort of heartening lesson that I take from both of those examples is I do think of colleges and universities as really difficult to shift. Right? They're hard to change. But these two examples make me think that just like any other institution, colleges and universities are actually more adaptable than we give them credit for. So I hope that that has given you some inspiration as well as it's given me. Thank you.
We have about 15 minutes for conversation with the audience. I don't see a microphone around, so you just use your best capacity. Yes.
Okay, I have a question for Lynn, but anybody else can chime in, it's fine. In the Sonoma County fires 2 years ago, we had at least 3,000 families that needed casework. We had 17 caseworkers. And fewer case managers. So we had a tremendous shortage of people who could address the issues. We had a single agency that wanted to be the lead agency and was resistant to accepting the volunteers from the public, even if they had social work degrees. What I'm wondering, since you brought up this issue, is whether among the schools of social work, we could create a network that had a disaster plan. Since disasters don't usually happen in the same geographic area every time, it's like if we could have gotten an influx of certified people to come into our area, help for the first 6 months, and then go back to their school situation. That's one idea that I never heard floated, and I'm wondering if there were a possibility of creating this sort of background disaster preparedness policy.
Yeah, that's an excellent fantastic idea, and certainly something that has been among the networks of the network of schools of social work. We do have a capability to immediately identify with each other if you have students who can come. You know, we have that. But I think what's missing, and what your point raises, is there's still, we do have to do a little bit more work to say, to understand what the local context is that we're sending people to. So in a state like California, I might think that there would be local schools that would be able to be more readily activated. And
So we have a state university system, and that's will mirror the city system.
yeah,
So but we might be able to use the same network model from one state to another and do it within the state.
yeah,
We
absolutely.
even had school of social work in the fire area, and I didn't hear that they even stepped up to the plate. Partly because it was a private nonprofit that took the lead among the volunteer agencies, the community agencies responding. I don't know that they reached out to the school of social work.
Yeah, so that I think was what I was also reacting to in your comment, was understanding the local context and how much outside help is actually going to be welcome, and if there's a mechanism for it. But certainly, I think your question gives me more of a charge to make sure that at least our network knows to make the outreach.
Yeah, what happened was the major agencies kind of formed the junior high school girls clique, if you will. We all talk to each other, but we won't talk outside our group. And then those of us who were the outsiders and wanted to help had no opportunity to be useful.
Yeah, yeah.
So there were a lot of connections and networking that could have happened if it didn't. And now that we're sort of post-disaster, it's the time to build those relationships, build that trust we've been talking about.
Yeah, thank you.
It seems that the words networking and the need to connect, communicate, keep, popping up in the conversation, which is one of the proposals of RISE, just to have these networks. And apparently, in this case, it seems that they would have to be like state networks in specific areas, and then interstate connections between the networks, so as to deal with the specifics, again, the specificity of the local situations that cannot be sort of legislated, from very